Well, we're your election headquarters, and it is an election night that will go down in the history books in DeSoto County. The Mississippi special election yesterday wasn't just another vote. It was the first time voters cast ballots in a newly created majority black Senate district ordered by a federal court. WRG's Alex Coleman talked with one of the winners who made history.
If you live in one of the handful of districts in the state that had legislative races Tuesday, you may not have realized the domino effect of the results.
Republicans have held a supermajority in both the House and Senate the last 13 years. Tuesday's special election results break that cycle. Democrats gained 2 seats in the Senate, bringing the Republican total down to 34. That's one fewer than what's needed for a supermajority. The Republicans remain in control, but it will require more bipartisan efforts to pass certain measures that require a 2/3 vote.
Republicans expected Mississippi to be another routine win, another comfortable election night, another red state headline where conservatives walk away smiling while cable news pretends to act shocked for 6 straight hours. Instead, what happened in Mississippi turned into one of the most talked about political surprises of the week because Republicans lost by a wider margin than many analysts expected, instantly triggering panic, finger-pointing, celebration, excuses, and enough political spin to power an entire city. The moment the numbers started rolling in, political Twitter exploded like somebody dropped a firecracker into a gasoline station. Democrats were celebrating like they had just stolen a level from a video game they were never supposed to beat. Republicans were scrambling to explain why a state that usually leans conservative suddenly became a giant flashing warning sign on election night. And political commentators immediately did what they always do whenever an upset happens. They started speaking in dramatic movie trailer language, like democracy itself had just slipped on a banana peel. But underneath all the noise, the Mississippi result mattered because elections like this are less about one race and more about what they symbolize emotionally. Politics today is not just voting anymore, it is momentum, optics, fear, narrative warfare. Every election gets treated like a psychological battle for the future of the country, and when a party loses somewhere it expected to perform better, the reaction becomes 10 times louder than the actual race itself. That's exactly what happened here. Republicans came into this election believing the environment favored them, inflation concerns, economic anxiety, frustration over national leadership. All of those things created expectations that conservative turnout would remain strong. But instead, Democrats and independent voters showed up in larger numbers than many expected, and suddenly political analysts were forced to start asking uncomfortable questions on live television while staring nervously at touchscreen maps. Was this just a local issue? Was turnout underestimated? Were suburban voters shifting again? Was this frustration with national politics? Or was this simply one of those elections where expectations got too inflated and reality punched everybody directly in the face? Because politics in America right now operates almost entirely on emotional overconfidence. Every side believes they're one election away from complete domination until the numbers come in, and everybody suddenly starts pretending they were concerned all along. That is why election nights have become so chaotic online. Everybody talks tough beforehand. Then the results hit, and suddenly entire timelines start sounding like therapy sessions mixed with courtroom arguments. And Mississippi became the latest example of how dangerous expectations can be in politics. Because once the media starts calling something a guaranteed win, even a close result suddenly feels catastrophic. That is what made this loss hit harder for Republicans online. It was not just the defeat itself, it was the contrast between expectation and outcome. Those are the moments that create headlines. Those are the moments that create panic. Those are the moments that make donors nervous and commentators louder, and social media absolutely feasted on it. Memes started flying everywhere within minutes. People were posting screenshots of shocked commentators. Others were posting dramatic red state meltdown jokes. Political influencers immediately started turning the election into proof that their side's grand theory about America was correct all along. Because nobody ever reacts normally to politics anymore. Every election result becomes either the beginning of a glorious revolution or the collapse of civilization depending on who is tweeting. Calm analysis died years ago. Everybody wants victory laps now. Everybody wants humiliation clips. Everybody wants to declare the other side finished forever every single Tuesday night. And then 2 months later, another election happens and the cycle starts all over again. But what made Mississippi especially interesting was how quickly the narrative shifted from local politics to national implications. That happens constantly now. No race stays local anymore because national media immediately absorbs everything into the larger political war machine. A school board. Election becomes a battle for America's soul. A mayoral race becomes a referendum on the future of democracy. A state election suddenly becomes The biggest warning sign yet. Everything gets escalated because escalation keeps audiences emotionally locked in. And cable news understands that fear and excitement keep people watching longer than calm facts ever will. So once Republicans lost by a wider than expected margin, the conversation immediately transformed into whether this could signal larger problems moving forward. Some analysts argued it showed Democrats still had energy despite national frustrations. Others argued Republicans may have leaned too heavily on assumptions about turnout and enthusiasm. Some blamed candidate quality, others blamed messaging. Others blamed media narratives. And then, of course, came the classic American political tradition of everybody blaming everybody else while pretending they knew exactly what was going to happen beforehand. But there is another reason these election nights create such intense reactions. Elections are emotional scoreboards now. People treat politics like sports teams mixed with a religion. Victories feel personal. Losses feel humiliating. That emotional intensity completely changes how people consume news. Nobody just watches results anymore. They experience them like emotional warfare. Supporters celebrate online like championship parades. Opponents react like somebody just keyed their car. And politicians themselves know this. That is why every race now comes packaged with dramatic fundraising emails, apocalyptic ads, and enough "this election changes everything" messaging to make people feel like they are living inside a never-ending season finale. Mississippi simply became the newest episode in that giant political reality show. But beneath the social media screaming and cable news theatrics, there were real factors analysts focused on. Turnout patterns mattered. Urban versus rural performance mattered. Independent voter movement mattered. Enthusiasm gaps mattered. Local concerns mattered. And perhaps most importantly, expectations mattered. Because once voters and media personalities convince themselves a result is guaranteed, any deviation suddenly feels earth-shattering. That is why the phrase "stunning loss" spreads so quickly online. Surprise creates attention. Attention creates engagement. Engagement creates money. Modern political media runs on emotional voltage now, and Mississippi delivered enough emotional voltage to keep commentators yelling for hours. But one thing this election also revealed is how exhausted many Americans are becoming with nonstop political warfare. People are tired of being told every election means the end of the republic. They are tired of every result triggering instant doom speeches and victory speeches simultaneously. They are tired of politics feeling like a permanent blood feud, where nobody is allowed to breathe for 5 seconds. Yet at the same time, audiences keep clicking on it because outrage is addictive. Conflict is addictive. Watching one side panic while the other side celebrates activates something primal in people. That is why political content dominates online spaces so aggressively. It triggers emotion instantly. Anger, excitement, fear, validation, humiliation, triumph. Those emotions spread faster than facts ever will. And Mississippi became another giant emotional battlefield the moment the race was called. Republicans suddenly faced tough questions about strategy and momentum. Democrats suddenly saw an opportunity to frame the result as proof they still had fight left politically. Commentators immediately began debating whether the election reflected larger national trends or simply local dynamics. Meanwhile, ordinary voters were probably sitting at home wondering why every election now gets narrated like the asteroid scene from a disaster movie. Because honestly, American politics has become one giant dramatic trailer voice in a world where one election could change everything. And social media only amplifies that insanity because algorithms reward conflict more than context. The loudest reactions rise first. The most emotional takes spread fastest. Everybody races to deliver the hottest interpretation before the dust even settles. That is why election nights now feel less like civic events and more like emotional cage matches, sponsored by Wi-Fi and caffeine. But regardless of political affiliation, one thing became impossible to ignore after the Mississippi result. Expectations can destroy narratives overnight. Republicans entered expecting strength. Democrats entered hoping for opportunity. And by the end of the night, political analysts everywhere were suddenly rewriting their talking points in real time while social media roasted everybody simultaneously. That is the brutal reality of modern elections. Momentum is fragile, confidence is temporary, and public perception can shift in a matter of hours. Which is exactly why the Mississippi result hit so hard online. Not because it single-handedly changes the future of America, but because it shattered assumptions. And in modern politics, shattered assumptions are treated like explosions.